seemed like the kind of life anyone would dream of. A charming couple, a beautiful home, and a new baby. A picture-perfect family living in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. Their love story, captured in photographs and shared with the world, was the stuff of fairy tales. They traveled, laughed, and built a life that seemed too perfect to be touched by darkness. But fairy tales don't always have happy endings. This story isn't just about a murder. It's about deception so convincing that even seasoned investigators were misled. It's about a man who played the role of a devastated widower so well that he fooled friends, family, the media, and even law enforcement, until the truth emerged, shattering the illusion he so carefully crafted. What kind of person can lie so convincingly, knowing they are responsible for the very crime they mourn? How far can someone go to preserve their image, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy? And what drove this man to commit an act so heinous, only to cloak himself in grief afterward? At first, the world saw him as a heartbroken husband, a man who had witnessed the unthinkable, who lost his wife in the most brutal way imaginable. He held his infant daughter in his arms, shedding tears in front of cameras, pleading for justice. His pain seemed raw, his despair genuine. For over a month, the world believed his story. But as investigators dug deeper, cracks began to appear in his carefully constructed facade. The story that once seemed straightforward became anything but. This isn't just a case of domestic violence or a crime of passion. It's a chilling reminder of how easily appearances can deceive. A man who portrayed himself as a victim turned out to be the very perpetrator. A life that appeared perfect from the outside was, in reality, crumbling behind closed doors. In this documentary, we won't simply recount the events leading up to the tragic night of May 11, 2021. We'll delve into the mind of a manipulator, explore the motives behind the crime, and uncover how one man managed to deceive everyone, even the FBI. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't the ones lurking in the shadows, they're the ones hiding in plain sight. Caroline Louise Crouch was born on July 12, 2001, in Liverpool, England. She was the kind of child you couldn't help but notice, full of life, curiosity, and charm. Her parents, David and Susan Crouch, had dreams of a simpler life, far from the fast-paced world of the UK. So when Caroline was still young, they packed their lives and moved to Alonissos, a small Greek island nestled in the Aegean Sea. Alonissos was paradise, a quiet island where time seemed to move slower. It was surrounded by turquoise waters and lined with lush greenery. For Caroline, it was a magical place to grow up. She spent her days exploring the island, swimming in the clear sea and bonding with the animals she loved so much. Friends described her as adventurous, smart, and fiercely independent. A girl who seemed destined for a life of excitement and purpose. But it was during one of her visits to mainland Greece that everything changed. She was just 15 when she met Babis Anagnostopoulos, a confident and seemingly charming helicopter pilot. At 28, Babis had an air of experience and sophistication, the kind that could easily captivate a teenager longing for adventure beyond her island home. He was a man of the world, successful, polished, and older. To a young Caroline, he seemed like everything she had dreamed of. Stability, excitement, and someone who could whisk her away into a new chapter of life. Their connection was immediate. Babis was attentive, showering her with affection and making her feel special in a way no one else ever had. To Caroline, it felt like a whirlwind romance straight out of a movie. Despite the noticeable age gap, their relationship flourished. Friends and family watched as the young girl who once roamed the island carefree now found herself deeply immersed in a world of romance with a man who seemed to have it all. As their relationship grew, so did Babis's presence in Caroline's life. He wasn't just a boyfriend, he became her world. Together, they traveled across Europe, capturing picturesque moments of their love in scenic destinations. To those watching from the outside, it appeared to be the perfect relationship, filled with love, adventure, and endless possibility. By 2019, the couple took their commitment to the next level. They tied the knot in a private and picturesque ceremony in Portugal. Caroline, dressed in a flowing white gown, looked radiant beside her smiling groom. The photos from their wedding painted a picture of a dream come true, a young woman madly in love, standing beside the man who had promised her forever. Then, in 2020, they welcomed a daughter, Lydia, a symbol of the life they had built together. Caroline was just 19, balancing the joys and challenges of motherhood while trying to navigate her own identity. And for a while, it seemed like she had everything she could ever want: a loving husband, a beautiful baby, and a future full of promise. But beneath the surface, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Behind the curated social media posts and idyllic snapshots lay a reality far more complex. Friends started to notice subtle changes in Caroline, a quietness, a distance that wasn't there before. She was still the vibrant, adventurous girl they knew, but there was something else, a tension that hung in the air, too faint to fully understand, but too real to ignore. And that's the thing about love stories. They can be beautiful on the outside, while hiding something darker beneath. As Caroline's life appeared to blossom, cracks began to form in the foundation of her seemingly perfect world. Little did anyone know that the relationship everyone admired would soon become the subject of a tragedy no one could have imagined. Because sometimes the greatest deceptions are the ones hidden in plain sight. The life Caroline thought she was building was, in reality, a carefully constructed illusion, one that would soon come crashing down. And in the aftermath, the world would learn that not every love story has a happy ending. Behind closed doors, cracks had begun to appear in their relationship, cracks that no filter could hide. Caroline's diary became the silent witness to her struggles, a space where she could express the pain and turmoil she couldn't show the world. In those pages, she revealed a different side to Babis. To the outside world, he was the doting husband and successful pilot, but behind the facade, he was controlling and possessive. Slowly, the man who once seemed like her protector began to feel more like her captor. Their love story, which started as a whirlwind romance, had become something much darker. Caroline began to feel trapped. She longed for the freedom she once had, but Babis's grip on her life tightened. She thought of leaving him many times. Friends later recalled how Caroline hinted at wanting to escape, but she never followed through. Perhaps it was because of Lydia, her innocent baby girl, who deserved a stable home. Perhaps it was the hope that things would improve, that the man she fell in love with would somehow return. But deep down, Caroline knew the relationship was on a dangerous path. The fights became more frequent. There were moments of calm, fleeting glimpses of the life they once had, but they never lasted long. Caroline's once vibrant spirit grew dim. Friends noticed her change in demeanor. She was quieter, more reserved. It was as if she carried a burden too heavy for someone her age. Still, she tried to keep up appearances, putting on a brave face for the world, and, more importantly, for her daughter. In those final months, tension in their home continued to rise. Caroline's diary entries painted a grim picture, one of fear, of frustration, and of a young woman desperate for a way out. She had confided in close friends about her growing unease. She had even begun looking into options for leaving Babis for good. But leaving wouldn't be easy. Babis wasn't the kind of man who let go easily, and Caroline knew it. Despite the darkness closing in on her, Caroline clung to hope. She poured her energy into being the best mother she could be for Lydia. In those moments with her daughter, Caroline found joy, a temporary escape from the storm brewing around her. But no matter how hard she tried to hold on to that sense of normalcy, the reality was inescapable. Her life was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. Then came the night of May 11th, 2021. To those who knew Caroline, it began like any other evening. She was at home with Babis and Lydia. No one could have imagined that by morning everything would change forever. The events of that night would leave an entire nation reeling and spark a media frenzy that gripped the world. At 4 a.m., the peaceful silence of the neighborhood was shattered by flashing lights and the sound of sirens. Moments earlier, Babis had made a frantic call to the police. His voice trembled with fear, panic, and desperation as he painted a horrifying scene. He claimed that 3 armed robbers had broken into their home while the family was asleep. According to his account, they demanded money and valuables, tied him up, and murdered Caroline in front of their baby. The details were gruesome. The assailants had reportedly strangled Caroline with her own pillow while she lay helpless in bed, and as if to add to the horror, they had killed the family dog and left its lifeless body hanging from the banister. When authorities arrived, they were met with a chilling sight. The once serene home was now a crime scene. Caroline's lifeless body lay in the bedroom, Barbis was found tied up but unharmed, and baby Lydia was crying in her crib. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare, one that gripped the entire nation the moment it hit the headline. The story spread like wildfire. A young mother brutally murdered in front of her child, a father left devastated, and an innocent baby caught in the middle of it all. It was a crime that seemed random, senseless, and deeply tragic. The media was quick to latch onto the story, portraying Barbis as the heartbroken widower, a man who had not only lost his wife, but had also been left to raise their daughter alone. Public sympathy poured in for him. He was photographed holding Lydia tightly at Caroline's funeral, his face etched with grief as he bid farewell to his wife. But as the days turned into weeks, cracks began to form in the narrative. While Barbis played the role of a grieving husband to perfection, something didn't sit right with the police. They noticed small inconsistencies in his account of what happened that night. Some of the details he gave didn't add up, and as they dug deeper, the initial picture of a random home invasion began to blur. For one, the timeline of events raised eyebrows. Barbis claimed the robbers broke in during the early hours of the morning, but there were no signs of forced entry. How had they entered the house so easily, and why would they kill Caroline in such a brutal manner, especially if their primary motive was robbery? The investigators also found it strange that, despite Barbis being tied up, he managed to call the police shortly after the alleged robbers fled. How had he freed himself just enough to reach his phone? Then there was the question of the family dog. According to Barbis, the intruders had killed the dog to prevent it from alerting the neighbors, yet no one had reported hearing any barking or signs of struggle before the incident. And while valuables were indeed missing from the house, the way the crime was carried out didn't match the typical profile of a home robbery gone wrong. The violence seemed too personal, too targeted. As these inconsistencies piled up, the police knew they needed more evidence. They decided to widen their investigation. Forensic experts were brought in to examine the crime scene in detail. They combed through every inch of the house, looking for clues that might shed light on what truly happened that night. The officers also began re-examining Barbis's behavior, not just on the night of the crime, but in the days following it. And that's when something curious happened. Despite the overwhelming grief he claimed to feel, Barbis seemed almost too composed in his public appearances. Sure, he looked distraught at the funeral, but behind closed doors, he didn't behave like a man who had just lost the love of his life. Friends and family noticed that, while he spoke of Caroline often, there was a certain detachment in his words, as if he was rehearsing lines rather than expressing genuine sorrow. Investigators knew they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple break-in. This wasn't just a case of a random act of violence. There was something else at play here. Something darker, more calculated. And as they quietly continued their probe, they began to suspect that the grieving husband might not be as innocent as he appeared to be. For weeks, Barbis managed to maintain his facade, fooling nearly everyone around him. The media continued to paint him as a tragic figure. Friends rallied around him, offering support. Even the public, who were horrified by the senseless killing of a young mother, sympathized with him. But behind the scenes, the walls were slowly closing in on Barbis. As days turned into weeks, investigators continued their relentless search for answers. To the public, it still seemed like a heart-wrenching tale of a loving husband who had lost everything in a nightmarish break-in. But behind closed doors, the police weren't buying it. There was something about Barbis's story that just didn't sit right. The pieces didn't fit together, and the inconsistencies gnawed at them. Then, they got their first breakthrough. Forensic experts analyzing Caroline's smartwatch made a stunning discovery. The device had recorded her heart rate in the hours leading up to her death, and what it revealed contradicted Barbis's version of events. According to him, the so-called robbers had broken in and killed Caroline sometime after 4 a.m., but the smartwatch data told a different story. It showed that Caroline's heart had stopped beating hours earlier, meaning she had died well before the time Babis claimed the robbery took place. This was a game-changer. Suddenly, the theory of a random break-in unraveled before their eyes. It wasn't just a question of who anymore, it became a question of why. Investigators knew that if Babis had lied about the timeline, he was likely hiding something far more sinister. Determined to piece together the truth, they began scrutinizing Babis's movements on the night of the murder. Surveillance footage from nearby streets showed no signs of any suspicious individuals entering or leaving the house around the time Babis claimed the robbers had struck. Even more damning, data extracted from Babis's own phone show that he had been active during the hours he said he was tied up and helpless. He had sent messages, moved around the house, and accessed his phone multiple times, something that would have been impossible if his story was true. With mounting evidence pointing directly at Babis, the investigators knew they had him cornered, but they needed more than just data. They needed a confession. They decided to confront him with the evidence in a carefully orchestrated interrogation. Babis, who had maintained his composure for weeks, suddenly found himself under intense pressure. At first, he tried to stick to his story, repeating the same account he had given since that fateful night, but the police weren't buying it. Calmly but firmly, they laid out the forensic findings, the smartwatch data, the inconsistencies in the timeline, and the activity on his phone. With each revelation, Babis's resolve began to crack. The confident man who had once fooled an entire nation was now visibly shaken. Finally, after hours of relentless questioning, Babis broke down. The facade he had so carefully constructed came crashing down as he confessed to the unthinkable. He admitted that there had been no robbers. There had been no break-in. It had all been a lie, a carefully staged scene to cover up the truth. According to Babis, the night began like any other, but it soon turned into a nightmare. He and Caroline had gotten into a heated argument. Fueled by rage and unable to control himself, Babis admitted that he had killed her during the fight. Realizing the gravity of what he had done, he panicked. He needed a plan, something that would shift the blame away from him and make it seem like an unthinkable tragedy rather than a cold-blooded murder. So, in a calculated move, he staged the crime scene. He tied himself up, killed the family dog in a chilling act of misdirection, and scattered valuables around the house to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Then he waited. He waited for hours, ensuring that the timeline would match the narrative he was about to spin. And finally, just after 4 a.m., he made the call that would set his elaborate deception into motion. The confession sent shockwaves through the country. The man who had been portrayed as a grieving husband, a victim of a cruel twist of fate, had turned out to be the perpetrator all along. Friends, family, and the public struggled to comprehend how someone could carry out such a heinous act and then live a lie so convincingly. For over a month, Babis had played the role of a heartbroken widower with chilling precision. He had stood before cameras, attended Caroline's funeral with tears in his eyes, and even cradled their baby daughter in public, all while knowing that he was the one responsible for Caroline's death. He had fooled not just those closest to him, but even seasoned investigators, at least for a time. But in the end, the truth always finds a way to surface. And when it did, it revealed not just a crime, but a betrayal so profound that it left an entire nation grappling with the chilling question: how could someone who claimed to love his wife commit such a monstrous act? It was the day of sentencing, and the courtroom was filled with tension, as Babis Anastopoulos was sentenced for the premeditated murder of his wife, Caroline Crouch. The man who had once been a beloved figure, a young husband whose life seemed full of promise, was now facing the consequences of his actions. In the end, the court was clear. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. As the judge handed down the sentence, it was not just a victory for justice. It was a moment of closure for Caroline's family, but that closure would never erase the deep scars left by her brutal murder. For her parents, the grief was immeasurable. Their daughter, a bright light in their lives, was gone, and no amount of justice could bring her back. Her mother, in particular, spoke out in public, pushing forward with determination to raise awareness about domestic violence, an issue that sadly had been too often brushed aside until Caroline's death shone a light on it. Caroline's story became a symbol, a painful reminder of the hidden dangers many women face behind closed doors. It wasn't just her tragic end that ignited conversations across the nation, but the realization that domestic abuse can often be masked by charm, lies, and manipulation. Barbis's deception had shown just how easy it was for a partner to be deceived into silence, and how hard it could be to escape a toxic relationship. The country rallied behind the cause of domestic violence awareness, with protests erupting in cities and conversations shifting toward the importance of recognizing the signs of abusive relationships. It wasn't just about Caroline's death. It was about preventing future tragedies. In the aftermath, Caroline's daughter Lydia was left to navigate a world without the mother she would never truly remember. Fortunately, Lydia found love and stability with her maternal grandparents, who embraced her and shielded her from the shadows cast by her father's crime. They would raise her far away from the life her parents had once envisioned. But in the safety of their care, Lydia had the chance to grow up without the darkness of her father's actions haunting her childhood. Caroline's family, though broken by the loss of their beloved daughter, now devoted themselves to a different mission: to be the voice for those who might not yet have found the courage to speak out against the violence they face. They kept her memory alive, knowing that the pain they endured could perhaps help prevent someone else from walking the same tragic path. The case of Caroline Crouch serves as a reminder to us all of how deceptive a person can be when their intentions are driven by malice. It shows how easily someone can manipulate the very people who trust them the most, and how the victims often feel isolated in their suffering. It also underscores the importance of vigilance in relationships, the need for open conversations about abuse, and the power of believing someone when they say they're in danger. But perhaps the most chilling element of this story is how Barbis's actions came to light. The evidence was there: the smartwatch, the phone data, the inconsistencies in his story. But for so long, no one noticed. It took time, it took patience, and it took the unwavering determination of investigators who refused to let the case go cold. What can we learn from this story? We learn that appearances can be deceiving, that not all is as it seems. We learn that no one should ever feel trapped in an abusive relationship, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually come to the surface. And we learn that sometimes the person you trust the most is the one who is capable of the most unimaginable betrayal. It's a tragic story, but it's one that should push us to take action, to speak up when we see signs of abuse, to support those in need, and to never forget the importance of trust, honesty, and love in any relationship. If you were shocked by this case, if you believe no one should ever suffer in silence and that justice should always prevail, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you think about the twists and turns in this case. And if you believe that every life, every story deserves to be heard and understood, subscribe to our channel. Don't just stay silent, join the conversation. And for those of you who believe that no child should ever grow up with the burden of their parents' violence, subscribe now and let's keep raising awareness together.